Good evening, friends. Welcome to the new podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We discuss topics such as sexual abuse, religious disenfranchisement, and other types of addictions. This live platform offers counseling sessions, continuum, question and A, and also we are working with a team that includes Lita Williams, Personnel Director, Tennille McLeod, Technical Director. Program contributors also include Pastor Brown, Ray Edwards, businessman, and of course, Dale Rude, government engineer. He does the program history part of it. And of course, my name is Prince, licensed counselor, founder, and ACU Center, a 501c program, retired. When the views and opinions expressed on the podcast don't always reflect Wounded Hearts, Wounded Staff, the staff here that works here. Be advised, these topics contain sensitive content and it may elicit on your part viewer discretion. Friends, our focus is to implement three things. That's our main genre here. That's our mission statement, to implement reconciliation, healing, and forgiveness. And those three work together. Thanks for joining the process. We can all do our part in pursuing those goals within the Church of God. I want to introduce our special guest. Unfortunately, she's sick tonight, Tabitha Ward Edwards. We covered your prayers for her. She'll be with us when she gets better in a couple of weeks. We also have Thomas J. Russell. He's feeling fine tonight. Glad about that. Businessman, founder of King Priest, a 501c program. It's a not-for-profit program helping out Rise syndrome children. Also, friends, our viewers, our audience, we want you to join us tonight. You can go to YouTube and type in Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You'll see the link, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches, and you can click in and get your question or your answer in. I want to thank the viewers, friends, and we're getting some positive feedback, some good phone calls these past week for counseling. And tonight, there are people that are listening who've been wounded. Want to do all we can to support and help you. One caller said, Moon, what are you all doing? What is your end game? Again, I go back to our mission statement. We're trying to produce, implement three things, just three things: forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing within the Church of God. Let's do our part to see that take place among God's people. Friends, the discussion this evening is talking about the church's children, a lost generation. There was a study in England where they tested 43% of older adults, and those 43% attending services, just about half there in England. But the same area, we find that out of every 100 young people, only one, out of 100, only one was attending church services. I was in Australia some years ago, and the churches were empty for young people. They just were not there. I want to show you a brief slide projection before we go on to our guest tonight, and to let you know how this definitely affects me. As a young man, this was our church years ago. Oh, we had many, many young people there, just coming out of the walls, so to speak. And it was a blessing being there, the support, the people that were there for the camping trips and all of those fun things we had to do. Now, if you were to go back to that church, you might see 15, maybe 20. In other words, friends, a lost generation. So if you've been calling for counseling, still do that. We're there to serve you, because again, someone tonight who's listening has been wounded by church issues. We want to be a help and support to get past those situations. We want to go to our guest tonight, again, Thomas J. Russell, with the following questions, because he's been through this. Church of God child, as I mentioned earlier, and you want to let us know how he was able to heal and to move forward. Uh, Brother Russell, what would you say to a person who's been wounded in the church? What would be your advice to them?
My advice to a person that have been wounded in the church, it'll be it's not simple, but it's something you have to do. You have to keep pressing forward. Um, a lot of people that have problems in the church, the first thought is to leave the church, but it's not the church that wounds people. Hurt people. A lot of times, people, when it happens inside of that structure, they want to leave the church and they're actually leaving God. God ain't never hurt nobody. He's not a bully for any on anybody. So what I recommend with people that are hurting, I always stick to the same thing. I think they should tell somebody, find somebody to go talk to, find somebody to go tell, find somebody to say somebody to when you get hurt in the church, because it could be a misunderstanding, or it could be somebody who might not know all the rules and regulations of or the vision of that house that you're in.
Very good. What process did you use to get past the pain that occurred to you years ago?
Um, well, me personally, I didn't have a whole lot of pain, but if I was going to use the process to everything I do when I was young, I still do now that I'm an adult. Um, I try to identify what happened first. You have to identify what took place. If you have pain, you got to know who did it to you. Like I said, hurt people. So a lot of times, people who when you start talking about children, a lot of times, and you hurting children, I look at those as child predators. I don't care where they at. So when you start hurting children, it's something wrong with that person, because children are they're blank slates, they're innocent. So the process that I would use, that just like when a child, and when I'm hurt now, when people try to hurt you now, um, just like you said, this whole program is about being able to forgive somebody as quickly as possible.
Mhm. How does forgiveness and healing work? Or, in other words, can you have healing without forgiveness, or vice versa? How does healing and forgiveness work together?
Well. For me, uh, you can't heal without forgiveness. You could try to heal. A lot of times, people have issues that they deal with, and they try to say, "Oh yeah, I forgave that person." Forgiveness is a lot deeper than what people think it is. When you forgive a person, you got to forgive a person where you can operate on a level where there's no backlash, no recoil, no feeling, and it takes time. Sometimes when you forgive a person, you have to get around them to get acclimated to the forgiveness. A lot of people like to forgive because they don't see a person, or they don't see a thing. That's the what we call in the shop, we call it the ostrich syndrome, where you stick their head in a hole, and just because they don't see it, they think it's not there.
Mhm.
So a lot of people take on that syndrome, and when they see the person or the thing that hurt them, all those feelings come rushing back at one time. So healing is a process, and that's why they say you have to work through it. I'm talking about, it is a job. You literally have to work through it. And like any job that you go to, you first need to be orientated on what you're dealing with. A lot of people don't get orientated on forgiveness, so they don't even know how to work through it.
To our director, is there any comments or questions coming in?
Yes, Mrs. DA asked, what happened to that whole generation? And I'm thinking she's referring to that slide, Pastor, that we showed earlier, a generation of young children.
Thank you for the question, Miss D. I'll make a short story shorter. During those years, our church was pretty nice size, right around 600. A certain place, certain pastor was there, and issues arose. and they caused a lot of conflict, a lot of wounds, and it just split up into 3 different churches. And because of the police coming in, unfortunately, the judge being involved in the case, locking the doors, families were split up, rumors were put out, it was magnified 100 times, and wounds occurred. So the children, a little older than me, they just got disenfranchised. They got wounded and went to the world. And so we are trying to reach those, even tonight, who've been wounded. So they just scattered. The majority just went to the world, just went to sin. Some lost their minds. I know 3 have extreme psychosis because of it. And yeah, that's what occurred, unfortunately. Thank you for the question, though. Appreciate that.
Now, I did have a comment or a question actually for Jeff. He had mentioned something about being programmed, forgiveness. That's not so natural, Jeff. Can you dive into more how to forgive? I think that's a very hard thing for individuals to do. How does that process? What's the first step in learning how to forgive?
First of all, you have to identify what type of pain you is. Identify. That's what I mean by orientated. You have a lot of times people don't really know. Like, say for instance, like he said, a lot of those people was disenfranchised. Let's just use that for instance. You have to seek counselors. You have to seek people who are certified and specialists in those areas of asking questions and finding out what's wrong with you. Then once you identify the problem, you can set a program to where you can work with that person. A lot of time people that have been hurt, they don't want to hear a lot of everything is going to be all right. They don't want to hear just don't worry about it. No, they've been hurt. So you need to take steps, and you got it. It's easy to say, oh, just pray about it. No. You got to take these people by the hand. You got to have programs set up to walk them through that. And that's why I say counseling is very important, and utilizing the people that are specialists in those areas. And a lot of times people get hurt, and they try to sit down and say, oh, we just gonna pray about it. It's not that easy, because sometimes when people get hurt, they can't even they don't even have a mind to pray. They don't even have a mind to even go back to the church. So you have to do just like the government. You have to bring a spiritual police in and arrest those people or that person and bring them in. And then you sit them down. And then once you sit them down and talk through it and get their side. One thing I learned in when we took the classes in clergy, when you're counseling people, you just don't take one person's story. They say there's always 2 sides to a story. So you need to just, if you can get both sides and find out what happened and know the history of it, it always work out a lot better before you just start working on them also.
Mr. Director, any comments from the?
We have quite a few coming in. Ms. Williams wanted to know about Brother Jeff's generation. What happened to your generation?
My generation, a lot of people, my generation, I see them, and in my generation, I can say a lot of people were more hurt because it was self-inflicted. When you're in the church, there are rules and guidelines that you might not understand. Everything that's been taught to us, a lot of things you just don't understand because you haven't lived long enough. A lot of times I talk to older people and I tell them, they say, hey man, you got a lot of wisdom on this. I said, wait a minute, you've been my age before, but I ain't never been your age. So I let them know off the bat that I need to sit down and listen to you. A lot of our young people in my generation, they didn't want to listen to nobody. We started off, a lot of the parents felt like, for instance, that from my point of view, I feel like a lot of parents felt like you can't whoop my children. You can't say nothing to my children. I feel like it takes a community to raise a child. And I think the community somehow got weak. And when the community of adults get weak, the children start suffering. And a lot of times people think their little girl, their little boy is something special, but God have a way of doing things, and he have instructions. And when you follow those instructions that God put out there, I think all the kids will be okay. But for my generation, I think somehow something slipped in that area.
Director,
Well,
any? Okay.
yeah, I have some questions popping up here, Jeff, so bear with me here. Ms. DA wants to know what kind of counseling. You mentioned counseling, and she wants to know, are you talking about church counseling or therapy?
No, actually both. Because what happened is, the reason why I say both, because you don't want to get a situation where you fall outside of the guidelines of the state or wherever you at. That you need church counseling, and you also need therapy. Some stuff you want to just go because you want to have a record of it if something else was to pop up. So you always follow the guidelines of the state that you in, and then you also follow the guidelines of the church, and make sure that person in the church is qualified to counsel. Amen. So a lot of times people want to go get counsel from people who's not qualified. No, like for instance, Pastor Moon, he's a qualified counselor. So find somebody such as himself who doing programs like this, and not just. I'm gonna tell you this: wounded hearts. I'm not saying that just because I'm on it. You got one form of saying that you can counsel is to sow into programs like this, so that the next generation can have this, that they can get the benefit from it. Because a lot of people don't want to sow. I don't really want to change the subject. I want to answer that question. But a lot of people are sowing into things, but they're not sowing into stuff like wounded heart, so that people can get the help. But at the same time, they'll go into therapy outside, and those are government funded, so they got all kind of money, but they're not going to give you the trajectory from God's point of view. So you on this end, you're going to get God's point of view as well as a licensed state point of view. So you kind of need both, and you got to just kind of figure out where they at. That's what I mean by orientating them. You got to sit them down and kind of see where they at.
A few more questions here, Jeff. Does forgiving include forgetting?
No. A lot of people, because when you forget something, you have a tendency of burying it. People know you remember what they did to them, and the only reason why I say that is because God don't forget. When the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt, certain people snuck up behind them and killed off the old and the weak, and he said, "I'm gonna get you." But you got to, so when something happened to you, you got to take that approach. You got to leave it alone and let God deal with it. That's what I mean by dealing with wounded heart. Let people that are qualified on this end deal with that. But then there's a state issue that person need to be reprimanded. So they need to be dealt with by, if it's a sexual crime, they need to be dealt with by the law. So it works both ways. So no, you don't forget it, because anytime you forget something, you're bound to revisit it again.
True. I believe here's one more question, Jeff. Ms. Williams asked if there are some Facebook as friends or groups or pages that seem so destructive towards the church. How can we separate them from those before they are influenced by others?
Well, what I would say, like those Facebook pages that are destructive to the church, is all noise. Is all noise. See, one thing I noticed, that when you're a young man and your heart is honest, honesty is the key. If you really want help, God will send you help. We used to sing a song, He'll send you help from the rams of light. So in Jehovah's might, he said, put the foe to flight. So if you're honest, that's all noise. So he'll send, if you're honest, it's something about honesty that God responds to. So, I tell people to make sure you're honest, and if you're dealing with certain things, just be tired of it. And when you're honest and you're tired, it happens.
Well, Tom Wingate asks, and I think he's just reiterating what you had mentioned, Jeff, earlier. He said, how is government counselor going to have any input that is based upon true righteous opinion? Very good point, Tom.
Oh, that is an excellent point. That's why I said you gotta have both. That's why I said it's important to get programs like this. Now the government will work from the side because there are laws. That's why I said in certain cases, if you're dealing with children, molestation, there are government mandates that you have to tell. Those things have no statute or limitation on them. So those people need to be punished for their crime, but it's not for us as Christians to try to figure out. You let God and the law, those that are in position to handle those things. What you have to do from a counseling point of view, see, from what I learned is when people come to you, and you got to let them know, hey, listen, I'm up front. I'm not gonna, if it's anything sexual, anything that deal with children, anything deal with certain things, I'm going to have to report it. Understand that. So that's why you got to have people who are qualified and licensed to talk to these people. So you got to tell the government, because the government need to get involved at that point, because it's no longer a personal matter at that point. You got to get involved. The government will. You might not want it, but it has to happen. Right. It got to.
Right.
You know, Carrie Ann has an interesting point, and I think a lot of people have this sort of, feedback or feeling about counseling. She says to see a counselor say something's wrong with me, and it's the people at the church who were wrong.
So when you say seeing a counselor saying something's wrong with you, in a way, there's something wrong with all of us. just being honest with you. That's why we're striving. That's what Jesus came for. I'm gonna tell you, and pointing the fingers doesn't make it better. And because at the end of the day, we all have something that is wrong with us. You know what I'm saying? And so I get what she's saying, that the people at the church, but the church is the people, not the building. We got to make sure we stay focused on that, which I'm sure we already know. Now, every person is not a reflection of what the church stand for as a body. If my hand hurt, that don't mean my head hurt, but it's obviously a problem. So I'm going to wrap that hand up and deal with that. And I'm going to keep on moving, but that don't mean I'm not going to go continue looking around at what I need to see. So when you talking about something wrong with the church, there's nothing wrong with the church. It's just wrong people in position. So I can't just internalize that and say the church or the body, the whole body. It's just that one member, that one person, that one thing. That's the problem. So if you deal with the problem, if you take the splinter out of that finger, then you'll feel a lot better.
Friends, our time is just about gone. Our questions, we didn't get through them, but we have one last question. Brother Jeff, what would you say to pastors, Church of God pastors? What would you say to us tonight? What would be as a Church of God child, issues you've heard about? What would be your counsel to pastors tonight, Church of God pastors? What would you say to them?
What I would say to Church of God pastors, I would tell them to be strong. I'm a firm believer that Church of God pastors mean well. God don't call you just because you did something wrong. When God called you, you responded to a call, and there's a charge on your life. So I would tell them to be strong. Some of the stuff that we have done, I remember one time I was talking to a friend of mine. Well, I go and say it, Brother Moon. I was talking to Brother Moon, and I cut his hair earlier when I first started cutting his hair, and I didn't know that I was kind of heavy-handed. But after cutting hair for about 15 years, he came back and got a haircut, and he was like, "You finished?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Wow, I didn't even really feel it." Man, it looked good. But he said, "Man, he told me when you first started cutting my hair, you was kind of rough." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, bro. I didn't mean that, but I was young." Church of God pastors are the same way. We do things, we kind of heavy-handed in areas that we might not know, but give us some time. That's why I said you can't point it at the whole body. You give them some time. Work with them and come back and see them after a couple of years. Let them go through some things. Let them get on the ship. Let God work with them. You got to remember, they still people. And one thing about pastors, you supposed to smell like sheep, not act like them.
Okay. Any more questions, Director?
No, just some great comments, Mrs. D. I appreciated the topic tonight, which is wonderful.
Okay. Friends, our time is past gone tonight. Friends, this podcast is by Church of God, for Church of God. Most of us have been affected by division, unfortunately. So we can do all our parts to find ways to implement and sustain meaningful forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. And you can't have one without the other. We want to thank our guest tonight, member Sister Tabitha Ill, Thomas J. Russell, his insightful perspective, the Wounded Hearts staff tonight. Thank you so much. And our listening audience, thank you for your questions. You've been so good. Yes. May the Lord bless you. We'll see you next week on Thursday. May the Lord bless you.
Amen.